I See Glutamates, an editorial by Robin Hood, Part 3. What I've learned is on a biochemical level, silent damage can take place without us realizing it or understanding the reasons behind it. The liver, skin, pancreas, and kidneys are great organs for nullifying toxins, so most people don't think about food as a cause of our problems. But then you might ask, what would happen if you put low-grade octane into the gas tank? Well, what we'll see is a buildup of chemicals we don't really want, and we'll see the parts wear down faster. But do you actually know what compounds can cause problems? Part of the problem we face is deciphering how different types of foods react in our bodies, what is beneficial, and what could be the source of many problems we blame on other things. I think we need more detectives that specialize in the biochemistry of the human body. Think Sir Arthur Conan Doyle or Agatha Christie for a moment. Some of the greatest mysteries in life are still within the human body, and for good reason. Each one of us is different. We ultimately have to be the detectives over our own bodies. The conclusions I've drawn based on my findings as well as my personal experiences may have no bearing on you. This is why I had to figure out what really worked for me. As you've heard about on my journey, if I would have given my ownership of my condition over to another so-called professional, or even a government agency like the FDA, God forbid, I probably would have sentenced myself to blindness, or at least a lot of pain, and maybe a lower life expectancy. In a nutshell, what I discovered is I was most ignorant of the most basic thing in life, what I put in my mouth. The old adage, you are what you eat, needs to be revised for the 21st century. It needs to be more like, you need to investigate what you eat. As I've been pointing out, only you know what's right for yourself. One thing to keep in mind is that the individual usually gets lost in the realms of science. And I'm pointing my finger right now at scientific studies. It's good to keep in mind that scientists only draw conclusions about groups, i.e. sheep, and not individuals. For this reason, one must be cautious and skeptical to jump on any bandwagon and think a new behavior is beneficial when one study says this or that, or one person makes one claim, like I'm doing right now. I know it's good for me, and I don't know what's good for you. But hear me when I say that the evidence exists on this subject and is available to you now. Personally, I like to decipher and break down science in terms of snake oil, especially these days with so many contradictory studies out there. In modern-day science, you have to think in terms of motivations and agendas. It is my belief that there is some science out there that is actually faulty, or there is not enough evidence to come to a conclusion even though a subject may be deemed true by the experts, quote unquote. The scientific method is rarely talked about these days. When a new theory comes along that works better or fits better compared to the past theory gets thrown away and replaced with the new one. A hypothesis is just the first step into creating the ultimate theory, but there are many hypotheses out there that scientists view as the gospel, and a study's result just simply supports the hypothesis. And of course, studies are funded. So a faulty study based on bad data collection, for instance, can lead to a faulty hypothesis, which can then lead to a faulty theory. It's all kind of like a stack of cards. It is really Father Time that's on our side. Ultimately, these bad theories will get found out and replaced with new ones. Of course, this assumes that there are people out there like you and me that actually take the time to pursue the evidence, the actual real data, based on a multitude of studies. But of course, that could lead to many years or decades or even centuries later before the truth is found out, not to mention the cost of ailments suffered or the lives that could have been saved. Again, this is why you, the individual, must be proactive about all this. Ironically, no one takes the blame in science. But if truth is staring you in the face, would you do anything about it, or would you just leave it up to the experts? On this issue of glutamates, I think I know enough science to annoy those so-called scientists that have thrown out the scientific method for non-scientific agendas like profit, fame, or what have you. In recalling my history of science courses from college, science was never intended to be a moneymaker, nor involve an emotional response from the public, nor was it meant to be a religion. There's a lot of science out there today conducted in the 21st century based on models, studies, theoretical outcomes, and predictions. So if you decide to do some fact-finding like I've done, I've created 3 rules to remember about science. 1. The collection of evidence is based on human observation or an extension of our 5 senses. If science is theoretical, meaning it doesn't have solid evidence, then it has no means of being observed. It is unverifiable and therefore science fiction until it can be observed. And number 3, if a scientific principle has some part of its foundation based in science fiction, then the science premise is still science fiction. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying to dismiss theoretical science. It has its place. I'd just like things to be more concrete, especially if it messes with your life. So now I want to dive into my findings a little bit more. So what exactly are glutamates? Glutamates are the salt version of an amino acid called glutamic acid that naturally occurs in a great number of food sources naturally. As many of you know from your high school biology course, amino acids are the building blocks of protein, and proteins occur in just about every food source. There are 2 glutamate forms, a D version and an L version. The D-glutamate version form appears to be the worst in our bodies because we just simply don't know what to do with them, unlike their L-glutamate counterparts, in which the body can deal with them much easier. It's still my hypothesis that when in higher concentrations, whether the L form or the D form, too much of it can cause damage to the body in many ways. I usually have to hit myself over the head with this next fact. Never before in the past 6,000 plus years of recorded human history have we consumed the volume of glutamates than what we have done in the past 20 or 30 years here in the US. I think most of us are familiar with one salt form especially of glutamic acid, monosodium glutamate. Although MSG is one of the widespread glutamate compounds in our food supply, it is just one of many sources of the overall consumption. Back about a century ago, MSG was first concentrated from dried kelp, but the easiest way to make some glutamic acid is to dry something out. For instance, just dry out some fruit or some milk. They'll have a higher amount of glutamates compared to their non-dried form. Protein, carbohydrate, and fat balance also makes a difference. The higher the protein content, obviously the more glutamic acid you're going to get in it. Let's use milk as an example. Whole milk has a lot of fat in it, non-fat milk doesn't. So of course your non-fat milk is going to have a higher protein content and more glutamates. Now it's funny if you start looking at food labels. Look at something like milk chocolate and you'll find a lot of dried milk powder in it of the non-fat variety. So just keep in mind that drying out or heating foods can often cause more glutamates. And as I previously said, glutamates are an excitatory neurotransmitter known as an excitotoxin. Moreover, glutamic acid can damage the nerve cells and brain cells. Let's add 2 plus 2 for just a minute. What if I told you there was a focus right now in research being done to counteract Alzheimer's disease? And guess what it is? The research is focusing upon drugs that block glutamates. You also may have heard of new diets that are called gluten-free, but don't confuse glutamates with gluten. There is an interesting link between glutamates and gluten, though. It turns out that wheat gluten, in particular, is one of the most concentrated forms of glutamic acid found in a natural food source. However, I'd like to remind you again that glutamates are all over the place now in our food supply in high concentration because of food manufacturers. You can find glutamates all over the place, such as powders like milk, wheat, soy, corn, peas, beets, to name a few, yeast extract, barley or malted barley extract, casein, and seaweed. But the list doesn't end there, of course. I'd like you to do your own research. Many gluten-free products have lots of glutamate still because they replace out wheat gluten with, like corn powder, for example. But since gluten is such a concentrated form, if you're looking to reduce your gluten intake, you're actually lowering your glutamate intake as well and not knowing it, in some cases at least. Some breads like Ezekiel bread have less gluten because the sprouting process destroys the gluten. Gluten is like the glue in bread. This is why if you order a gluten-free pizza crust, it always falls apart on you because the glue is gone.